Welcome to another edition of Morgan Latif Presents. Today I'm joined by Ronny Fehling. He is partner and head of artificial intelligence and VP of generative AI at Boston Consulting Group X. And we've spent some time discussing how to build a successful artificial intelligence strategy, how to secure the buy-in, and how to make sure that the rollout generates profit. I'm really excited for you to join me on this podcast. Let's dive straight in. We're going to be covering the topic of artificial intelligence, which is a really hot topic, one that is generating a lot of conversation amongst both my clients and candidates. Everyone's working out how this is going to impact the business, where this is going to be useful, and we're hoping that we can learn a lot from you in this situation. So maybe you can give me a brief introduction to yourself and how you came about to be so interested in the topic of AI.
Sure. Okay, good. I'm part of BCG, more specifically BCG-X, which is our AI division. So apart from the strategy that BCG focuses a lot on, the management consultancy, BCG-X is our tech build division. So there we, together with 3,000 techies, we help go beyond the strategy that we need to deliver with our core consultancy management. And then we build out these end-to-end solution really to drive either new businesses, increase revenue, reduce cost. And we combine really world-class expertise around domains, industry knowledge with world-class technology with our partners as well to build these end-to-end solutions. So I work a lot with the C-suites on that to identify from top down, really how can AI bolster their strategy. And then on the other side, I work with the tech organizations on the side of the client and our teams, our data scientists, our data engineers to start and accelerate this digitization. You asked, how did I start it? Well, I studied computer science back in the days. And I fell really in love with complexity theory. I was fascinated by the possibility to classify problems on a mathematical way. And I had the luxury to work with the late and great Marvin Minsky in Boston, where we had the groundworks of deep learning, etc. Yet it didn't work, plus there were no jobs. So after leaving uni, I went to the startup ecosystem in Montreal. I was in a company that was later acquired by Oracle and therefore moved to Silicon Valley. And I was there really in the midst of the AI spring. When I studied, it was the AI winter. And the first AI spring, one would say probably today, which was big data, IoT, and the cloud strategy that started there and moved to the cloud. And with that, I shifted more towards the client focus rather than, a pure tech and product focus. And I got part of Airbus Star Network, which is like an advisory board. You have workshops with the top execs there. And after the CEO asked me to lay out perhaps and suggest a strategy for AI for Airbus, something he must have liked on that. And I joined Airbus really to head the strategy and the implementation of AI. And for that, I moved to Munich to bring some of the Silicon Valley spirit to the mothership. Yet, I learned a lot of failures, and the digitization or the transformation really didn't work out the way that we wanted to. It's still a very powerful company, but I think the ambition that we had set, did not deliver on all levels on that. And that I found quite frustrating, and I tried to understand it. I got approached by BCG-X, which was at that time starting to build this new division. And this very, very strong focus on value impact, how AI can actually bring P&L level value, I think was what excited me really on that. Developing something is amazing, but knowing that it's used at scale and that it actually has an impact, I think is probably the most exciting part. And then, for the last 1.5 years, I've been focusing almost exclusively on Gen AI, really at this bleeding technology verge, helping companies to start with that technology, then working with the second wave of those pioneers really to scale it. And now I'm concentrating a lot on the quality and the responsible Gen AI. And that's where I'm also working a lot in partnerships with some of these, startups and tech companies.
Fascinating. I think one of the things that a lot of our target audience are going to be fascinated by is, like, can you explain some of the challenges that the companies face in integrating AI and aligning that with the strategic goals?
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it's just that, what are those kind of goals? On one side, we see CEOs and also now driven, a lot by investors and the board setting sort of these ambitious targets for either top or bottom line. And most of them actually expect that predictive and generative AI will help drive that revenue or that cost savings. But what we see is the absolute majority is actually failing on that. I think it's quite frustrating for a lot of them, and I think they're wrestling with some of the questions such as, where should they start? I had a lot of experience also in previous companies that I worked, but a lot of them, try out things or risk, but then there are lots and lots of these initiatives, and they don't know really how to measure their success of that. And I think on one side, what is that highest value opportunity that helps me transform my business? And of course, I need to try to see how can I achieve a short-term performance of AI while I'm building on the more long-term, foundations and capabilities on that. And I think a lot of what I'm hearing is also how to build that enthusiasm in the companies, for having AI across all levels of the organization, and most importantly, I think, how to drive adoption. The nicest AI is nothing if it doesn't get used or adopted by the change management. So while we see these mature companies and that I worked with, I think there are only like 10% of them. They're the ones that are succeeding in scaling the Gen AI or the AI, and then therefore furthering the gap that they have with the others. So I think we see the effects for those companies, but there are a few of them, and I think it's a combination probably of these kind of problems that slow down that adoption.
And just in terms of some of the language and the technical terminology, what's the difference between Gen AI and AI for some of us who are non-experts in this area?
Yes, yes, exactly. It's not, they're not fundamental difference in that they use, this term artificial intelligence. However, they do function on quite a key difference. I would say, and nowadays we say a little bit, the predictive AI, which is based a lot on the concept of machine learning. So it is often, in my world at least, where you have data and you learn constantly from that data. So you learn in real time, and you have these very good models that can improve over time, but they're also quite predictable, as the name said. Then you have generative AI, which is working off of a pre-learned model. And here, especially textual data, which was very different, a very different monster to work with. We had with the word embeddings, so the first large language models, we didn't call it really like that. For the first time, the capability to formulate on a mathematical scale, a similarity of the next word. But we also fundamentally try to predict the next word. That's essentially the core capability of Gen AI. So that's where it's the same. But it's a pre-learned model. We use it through prompting, chain of thoughts. but it doesn't learn, by every input you give it to. It learns asynchronously. So that's how, the implementation of it and the use of it is very different. It can, though, contextualize something that was very difficult before, semantics, meanings, and ambiguous information. So it really facilitates how we can manage unstructured data. So data that is not in, let's say, Excel spreadsheets represented by numbers and strict structures. And 80%, perhaps even more, of the data in enterprises is actually unstructured. So this really opens up a revolutionary way to access and use that kind of data.
Understood. And in terms of moving forward, what do you think are the key factors that at the moment are preventing companies from like maximizing their true AI potential?
Yeah, so as mentioned before, I think it's something like 2/3 of all transformation that fall short of the expectations that is set, either time, budget, or the total impact of it. And there's also a lot of money spent on the IT that really is slowing down that adoption. Some of the key factors I think is, mentioning before, how do I prioritize? If I have few resources, which eggs do I choose in my basket to look at while I have other company-wide concerns? I think in there it's also how do I measure that ROI for those opportunities with the KPIs, but also on the P&L level. We have, of course, as well, a lack of literacy, AI and Gen AI throughout the organizations, and also, a lack of specialized people or engineers on this. Then, a lot of companies, although I don't think it's always necessary, but oftentimes for the scale up, to integrate your solutions with the legacy IT system is very, very difficult. And you build up a lot of tech debt. And I think on the other side, what I now increasingly see is, especially in Gen AI, this difficulties reaching this sufficient accuracy and reliability of models or solutions, for business impacts. That's where not only for the business, some of the goals then become unreachable, but there's also high risk that false predictions of it or false responses, cause quite some harm.
And given all of that you've said right now, how can companies ensure then that AI initiatives are grounded in their overall business strategy and vision?
So I think, if I compare it to the points that I said before, I think the most important that I find is you need to mobilize these senior leaders, ideally the P&L leaders, the line leaders, the functional leaders, to embrace and actively champion, these kind of ambitions. They need to adopt it ultimately. And if you present them something that says, here's AI, it solves all your problems, I think, that's not best the way. And then I think you need to look at your talent gap, what you have. Do you need the engineers? Do you need senior people first, to find these opportunities, to define them, to size them, to prioritize them? And then, how quickly do you scale them? Do you scale them through partnerships on this? I think these are questions that are important to ask and therefore also to assess where you are. But as I mentioned before, at the end, I need to manage this change across my enterprise. So on one side, how do I communicate that ambition, set the right expectation, but how do I actually change my processes on that? And I think this is not something that you do afterwards. You need to do that on the onset of it. It needs to be part of the development of that solution. That's why I think, thinking that you will buy a solution and somehow it will, leapfrog your capabilities is probably one of the fallacies in that. and and yes, data is important. I often hear, well, perhaps our data is not good enough. I have not seen the case that data is absolutely unusable. And over time, yes, you might be able to collect and use better data on that. It's not a stopping stone, but it can be an hindrance on that. And then you have several IT topics, to simplify your legacy systems, to be able to adopt it. Again, this becomes more of an issue once you start to scale, I think. But then I think most forget that you need to keep that capability also and empowerment in the C-suite, to keep up to date with this rapidly evolving landscape in AI and the capabilities of that. So very quickly, it's managed down and it's managed across, to IT, but I think it needs to be owned by the C-suite.
And why do you think it's important that the C-suite owns the AI implementation?
As as long as it's regarded as a tool, let's say, we want to introduce Microsoft Word as a productivity tool, or some sort of co-pilot, it's a horizontal element. But once it becomes a functional focus, how you can boost, the revenue, or how you can address the cost that you're rising, it needs to become the ownership of that C-suite. And if you don't understand what is happening or what are the capabilities of that, I think it just doesn't fruition. So what we see is when we have the C-suite engaged on that and to owning that topic, not only do you have the ability to drive it down, to change the processes, which is not always easy, but also you have that sponsor and that challenger, at the very top, that keeps you honest and that keeps you focused on that impact realization.
And given that it's a C-suite responsibility, who's best suited within the C-suite to own that?
That's a really good question. And, honestly, we've seen different models of that. And today, I would say that there is, on one side, because you don't have a lot of people who always understand it, there's a way you start with it. And then oftentimes you start having a central group, small central group that has a responsibility for the entire company to look at that, to identify, these opportunities, size them, and look at the feasibility and work with the line owners, how to make that handover also to them. As it matures, I think increasingly that organization, gets more distributed along those lines. So I think, you might have a head of AI, but it needs to be sponsored directly, through the CEO best, or the COO. We see few models where it works under the CIO, not because the CIO is not capable of doing that, but typically the CIO has a different mandate. It doesn't have the mandate to increase the impact through cost savings or through revenue increase, but to deliver a certain service at the lowest possible cost and the highest quality. And these priorities bite each other a little bit. So that's why we've seen that having an own role on that really helps, especially at the beginning.
Okay. And given that you're suggesting maybe the CEO is vital in having that under his scope of responsibility, could you talk us through and give us a steer on what you suggest CEOs should do in terms of, talking through the steps involved in actually delivering and building a successful AI roadmap? What would that look like?
Right. So, and I think that's the right question. You need to start with thinking of AI from the impact point of view. It's not a tool, or something that can help you automate existing tasks. I mean, it does that to a certain extent, but that's not where the biggest value lies. This will become a commodity, and it's also, if you look at general productivity gains, it's very difficult and complicated to measure that. So AI should boost your existing offers, increase the market share, the value capture that you can have, and you need to have this done with the change management. Who better knows that than the CEO, to address and to focus on where it's possible. So if there's not like, okay, start with marketing or start with sales on this, what works best. There is a big component, in my opinion, in that personality as well. Having that champion that is ready to, start with it at the same time where we have good evidence that there's a high potential of it. So, sizing the price. So I think that's for me typically the first, in the simplest form. We try to establish the ambition that we have. Broadly cost, revenue, or efficiency. And then it can be the competitive edge as well. If we have some of the core functions of that, of course, it's difficult to right away go in there. And then we look typically on a P&L or a line level for the biggest opportunities or the challenges, that can drive that impact. So there's a set of use cases that you can collect. The organization typically knows a lot of them. You can bring outside perspectives in there. And I think then the really good work is where, of course, at BCG, we like 2x2s. I extend that a little bit to, a third dimension where I look at, on one side, impact, again, counted in money. Feasibility is both in terms of what data you have, how much time will it take to that, how difficult are the models, or how complicated it is to write these models to achieve the accuracy that you might need, versus, and that's the third dimension, and I think very important to look at, the risk of it. So risk being, perhaps in the EU AI Act, but also in terms of the exposure that you might have in somebody hacking it. We have a lot of examples where consumer-facing solutions are almost, being as a sport targeted, to have prompt injections. And with this, you can find sort of like the scoring capabilities of those top use cases. And then you look deeper, at the algos, the tech, the data, the people, the processes on that. And you have, with this, implicitly and explicitly, a roadmap. Basically, the first, 3 or 4 use cases are the ones that you should shortlist. Everything that comes after that, in my experience, by the time that you get to it, has changed already a lot. But nevertheless, oftentimes for organizations, it's useful to also build that out. But then you need to build it. You need to prove that value. And I would say, start with 1, 2, maximum 3 of these use cases. Put, your most capable people on it. Show that ROI, show that P&L level impact, and enable the line organization, to industrialize and scale it. And honestly, for me, then I see the biggest success on the group level. So if you go to the different businesses, really once you show the business impact, then everybody says, I want to have it too. Not because, it's an algo that's cool, but then that they see that AI can actually do something for them. And that's how you get also this adoption, I think, extremely
Earl-
high.
yeah, earlier you mentioned that impact is about money, right? And I suggest to you that's certainly going to be a real big consideration in anyone rolling out an AI strategy, right? How can companies identify the most powerful and impactful AI use cases for the specific needs that they have?
Yes. So I, as we looked in the past, there are a lot of promises for Gen AI around efficiency in that. And it's certainly an important aspect of it, and we've seen success for it. But we've, by now, I think, found 3 different buckets where we would categorize these use cases on, and within these buckets that can be applied to different organizations. I think that's where you look at those most impactful with the method that I described before. But these buckets, on one side, is on a deploy level, how we call it. Deploy means something where you enhance the efficiency with GenAI tools that can streamline, everyday business processes. So this is not necessarily very useful when you say, I want to reduce my headcount on that, but oftentimes it helps reducing the need for additional hires and daily operational friction. If you have problems right now delivering things on time, that's where it helps. So examples here for our meeting summary, assistance, code development, calendar management, invoice reconciliation. So those, you need a different kind of strategy of that. They're quite horizontal, often fall into some of the competencies of a CIO, and look at general productivity. The second bucket is about process reinventions. So you really elevate the impact that your current business processes have by transforming their processes, with AI. And these, I think, are where we see the biggest success also quite quickly. And they look not only with a tool on that, but this is the good opportunity to look at your existing processes where there are media breaks, where some of the existing tooling and data perhaps is out of date, and where GenAI can actually provide a new way of thinking about that process, and obviously things like design and engineering are good functions. Marketing, where the content generation, one of the strong suits of GenAI, can really play a very big case. Customer service, also the technology deployments. In the case of marketing, you have tangible ROIs such as faster time to market at a lower price. In customer services, you have different ROIs and KPIs that you can definitely measure apart from the additional intelligence that you get. And then the third bucket is certainly, what I would call the black swan bucket. And this is where you create new businesses through AI. So these are like AI native offerings. It's something where we get very, very excited, but they're also very difficult to find and to implement because they start very nascent. They require a higher level of investment at first, and they might, produce additional revenue, but they start slower, compared to your existing businesses. So, this can be hyper personalized customer experience, really truly AI powered services that are new around this. But I think where we see the biggest success is when you use a combination of these 3 different buckets, and it's not perhaps 30-30-30. I would definitely put more of the focus on that second bucket because it's more closer to your business and it's easier to do the change management through that.
Will it shorten my queues on customer service when I'm on the telephone waiting for somebody at the other end to pick up and I have to listen to that rubbish music that normally gets put on? That's what I want to know.
Exactly. Right? I mean, there you just got a good KPI to be measured on. What we've seen in customer services as well, like reducing the number of repeat calls, right? Because I get frustrated and hang up.
Yeah.
That's a very good way to look at it. But also, ideally, to be honest, avoiding the number of calls. How can I anticipate the problems, right? Because right now I need to really have these FAQs. And when does the FAQ really match your needs, right? Because it's not individualized enough. But we can see that even for some of the more standard, solution approaches, GenAI can help me. And therefore, I think the biggest effect comes from avoiding the calls that come to that. And that's a great KPI, both for the clients, the cost of the customer service organization, and of course, for the customer experience.
Yeah. It's a utopian scenario for sure when I get to avoid that situation. You're talking as well about organizations and being ready for this. How do companies identify and address like the gaps and resources in organizational structure and digital platforms? Is there any advice you could give on that?
I think it's not easy. There's not a one size fits all on this. Um, to be honest, we found that the biggest success in bringing them to that in that assessment is actually first to find that opportunity. Perhaps you're already doing that. Once you did the exercise of finding that, two, three opportunities, and you say, well, I'm already doing some of them, then align it with those objectives and see, is that on track? I think that's where I would start, definitely. We've seen that you need to be doing this in order to actually see what the capabilities are. Do you need the best data scientist? Honestly, if you're doing a deploy use case, meaning that your biggest focus is in capturing back 4 hours of the work week of every of your employee, perhaps it's not the data scientists you need, but you need a very smart way to find, those tech providers that can offer those tools on this. So I don't think there's a standard set of organizational needs, nor is there, I think, a standard deployment of, this is a governance structure, because I've seen the governance structure needs are changing over time as you mature on the AI curve. So it is to look a little bit how good you are, but without, like the benchmarks we've done are very helpful, but they're also very easy to do. They're not a gazillion factors on that. I think most come to light once you actually try to implement one of these use cases and you see where they're successful and where not, and how can you repeat that best? How do you need to set up? So it's not a very satisfying answer, I guess, because somehow I'm saying it depends. But if you want to see it positively, it's like, well, try it out and try to be very self-conscious about where you're seeing success and where not, and where do you see that, oh, if I only would have two more of these or of that, I could do more. I think then you're on the right path.
If you were to sum up the key takeaways for listeners looking to leverage AI for business success, what would those bullet points look like?
Well, I think one, the time to act on AI is now. I mean, we have the maturity of predictive AI. I'm trying not to say classical AI or the old AI, because brought us to a really exciting moment. With generative AI, we're complementing this predictive AI, and yes, there's a hype on that, and I think there's going to be some things that we're going to see where it doesn't work as well as we thought. The potential of it is just staggering on that, and we do see those pioneers, these 10% are really able to scale that, are increasing the gap versus the peers. So I think we are at that place, and if you don't start now, you really risk on falling behind. Then I think the other point is to really think and look at these three strategic plays to create that value and scale it with AI, which is this deploy, the reshape, and the invent kind of offerings. Again, it's not one or the other. It is typically an and, but you need to see how much weight you put on each, where, I think the one that allows you to measure that effect and see that reflected in your numbers at the end is probably the one that you want to focus on. And then the third one is execute successfully. And successfully does not mean don't allow for failure. Don't try to minimize the risk and take the lowest common denominator on that. But I think it is to look at it in a 10, 20, 70 approach. 10%, all what we talk about, the algorithms, the exciting AI on this. 20% is the technology and the data, the integration of it, how much data processing do you need of it. But 70% is the people and the processes. Look at your existing processes, not just how to make them faster, but how you can re-engineer these. And the long-term competitive advantages will come from all of that together. Otherwise, these organizations risk of being left behind.
Fair enough. What are your final thoughts and predictions with regards to AI? I mean, predicting the future is a risky business, but give me your best guesstimate as to what the future of AI in business looks like.
So I think the potential is staggering that AI brings. However, it is not easy to capture. It's easy to get something going, that looks 70% cool. But bringing that to the 99% accuracy and precision that I need for business is really, really difficult and sometimes just not possible. I think it does have a fundamental impact on businesses, some more than others, and I think the most likely thing we see, and I know it's quite vague, is we will see the rise, but also the fall of quite some few players in the next years. So we're going to see this gap rising between the successful ones and the ones that are the late adopters. And I think this is probably as good as my prediction could go. But we've seen this gap appear through AI in the past years. I think it will go rapidly bigger now.
Okay. I'm going to throw in a couple more questions that I think could be pertinent to a lot of the people listening to this. How can companies prepare their workforce for a future of more AI? Because I think naturally, a lot of people are worried, right? What's this mean for my job? Is my job going to disappear? And you want to secure and you want to calm people's feelings and reassure them that that doesn't mean that, there's going to be mass redundancies and mass unemployment as human beings become redundant in light of AI. What can we do to mitigate the risk and ensure that the workforce are bought into and feel secure about and optimistic about the AI potential?
Yes, if we communicate the AI as being, look, what you're doing now, we can do 200 times that, which means I feel like I'm on a mass production line. I think it's a difficult thing to do, as well as we will see how we can be more efficient, and in the background having the thinking of needing fewer people. That's also a problem. If we try to look at, and I think that was one of the targets of this reshape, how can I make the problems that you have, the things that we don't like, as we call in our industry, the ugliest hours go away. That's, I think, one of the very good ones. The next level, I think, is about trying to understand that it can scale our special knowledge, the things that make the company special, but also the capabilities of individuals, how we can scale it out. This is a sensitive one. In my learning, a lot of, if you do it wrong, you get a hoarding of knowledge in the company that you want to make yourself essential, not to be replaced by anybody, which is a problem for succession. It is a problem for scalability. If we find a way to say, look, if we can scale it, you don't have to do any more of the things in the same way that you did, but you get also an incentivized system of it. You're part of that scale on that, both financially and career-wise on that. I I think if we take the people with us to see, where AI is making huge advances. Um, a lot of times, not always, we see them in areas that are just very tiresome for people to do. So it's not about when we work with government employees, for example, they loved the perspective, and you need to work with them very early on of not having to go, through a different room, find a document amongst 1,000 pages of something, and then find that section, but having it digital at your hands and being able to query it and talk with that was a massive motivator for them. So I think it is not about replacement. It is something where businesses can scale. That's where we see the biggest adopters are the ones that are focusing on revenue boost on this. And of course, it's then motivating for all employees to say, well, we can achieve more, not necessarily always do more, with our resources, where the pie gets bigger for each of them.
Yeah, really interesting. And last question. I mean, if I were to think about benchmark companies that are doing this really, really well, in your opinion, um, who are the references? Who should I be going to look at and talk to? I know, for example, Danone have reached an agreement with Microsoft to put AI across all their operations. I mean, that's a significant investment and commitment to AI. It's early days and etc. But who else do you think are like benchmark companies who are ahead of the game in terms of the way that their sophistication and use of AI is showing results and allowing them to really maximize the potential of this new technology?
So, unfortunately, I cannot always talk about the clients that I work with, but I think what can help is yeah, there are some press releases obviously on that, but then there are certain key players also in specific industries where we know that the benefits of it, and actually the capability also required to reap those benefits, are quite high. And these can be regulated industries. MedTech is a very, very good one, where you can see how they have leapfrogged in it. Broad plays across multiple functions, is very difficult to achieve, but it does stem from, I think, a ownership concept, where the CEO and the C-suite said, this is important. We might not know every last detail of it, but we're showing a massive investment on that. And I think that in itself is probably really something to look up to learn from. So I do think you don't have to look into the same as your company. You don't have to look into the same function even. You don't have to look for the same tool, for the same AI technology in itself. But as we talked a lot about today, is the approach that you took, and how did you take your company to adopt that? So I think it opens up, the world of possible contexts that you can find for. And honestly, Dave, I think I want to hear it from the people that are those P&L owners. Not always. I mean, I'm fascinated and I'm interested in the AI, but not necessarily from the people who built it, but the people who actually, owned it and how they introduced it. Because the particularities of an AI model are very specific to a company or to the business or to the process. But how the person actually achieved that, I think, is probably the most interesting part. So if you have the ability, to know some of these P&L owners, that have implemented that, I think that is probably the most fascinating benchmark that I would look after.
Fantastic. Ronny, this has been a really insightful time that I've spent talking to you about artificial intelligence. I'm very grateful for your contribution and your output. And I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing where the future of AI takes us. Thank you very much for
Me
your
too.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.